Right now, Canada's wheat industry is booming and the US wheat market is facing a crisis. Buyers around the world are abandoning American wheat contracts at record rates, and confidence in US agricultural exports is collapsing. Over $2 billion in US wheat exports have disappeared from trade ledgers in just 6 months, leaving American farmers with unsold crops and storage silos filling up fast. Just across the border, Canada's wheat industry is dominating. International buyers are turning to Canadian wheat instead, and the shift has happened in just months. What allowed Canada to step in so quickly and take over the market? The answer starts with a wave of canceled shipments. Take the Philippines. In May, a country known for its loyalty to US wheat canceled a 12,000-ton shipment from America. Not long after, they signed a massive 110,000-ton deal with Canada and Australia. The reasons weren't just about price. Internal sources at the Philippine Milling Association pointed to political instability, customs clearance delays, and disruptions in insurance pricing tied to tariff volatility. The Philippine Customs Authority even slapped an extra premium on US wheat carriers for political delay risk. Canadian and Australian shipments didn't face that. It wasn't about who could offer the cheapest grain. It was about who could deliver on time, with no surprises. France tells a similar story. French mills have been buying American wheat for over a century, but in the first quarter of 2025, France cut imports from the US to their lowest level since 2002. Why? French milling companies ran into problems with US carbon tracking paperwork. The US system was clunky and slow. Meanwhile, the Canadian Ministry of Agriculture built their own answer. They embedded EU carbon scores right into the shipping invoice using QR codes. French buyers could scan and instantly see the carbon footprint. Canada's wheat exports to the EU jumped by more than 40%, with France leading the buying. South Korea moved even faster. As their government cracked down on glyphosate residue standards, US wheat samples kept failing tests. Glyphosate levels were between 200 and 400 parts per billion, compared to Canada's average of 30 to 70. Korean food giants like Nongshim and Orion flagged US shipments and shifted the bulk of their contracts to Canada. Mexico, another major buyer, cut nearly half its US orders, citing inconsistent port inspections, unpredictable phytosanitary approvals, and shifting customs documentation. Canadian wheat, on the other hand, came with predictable delivery and clean paperwork. By the end of May 2025, Canada's share of Mexico's wheat imports climbed sharply, while the US share dropped to just 17%. In contrast to a fragmented US system relying on private inspections, Canada's government-backed certification and integrated carbon tracking, complete with QR codes, gave buyers predictable, on-spec wheat. The message from importers was clear. They didn't want the cheapest wheat. They wanted reliability and transparency. That shift in priorities opened the door for Canada to capture the market, and Canadian producers saw the opportunity. Rising tariffs on canola have already driven many Canadian farmers to swap acreage for spring wheat. Orders from Asia and Europe keep coming in. Jerry Klassen, a Manitoba farmer and market analyst, put it simply, there is going to be a massive switch. He converted hundreds of his own canola acres to wheat this season, and producers across the prairies are making the same move. Canada didn't just watch the US lose market share, they built a system from the ground up to guarantee that buyers get exactly what they order. Canada now supplies nearly half of Italy's durum wheat imports, consistently hitting the 13.5% protein threshold that pasta producers like Barilla and De Cecco require. One inconsistent shipment from the US can disrupt an entire production run. That kind of precision matters in this market. As global buyers lost faith in US reliability, Canada had already built the digital infrastructure to guarantee quality, and it paid off. The difference isn't just in the fields. Canada invested $950 million into the Protein Supercluster program, setting up a fully digital supply chain. Every shipment comes with a QR code that reveals real-time protein content, moisture levels, and pesticide residues. A miller in Naples scans the code and knows in seconds if the wheat meets every spec. The US, by contrast, still sends out PDF certificates that buyers have to check manually. Canadian grain handlers use smart harvesters that automatically log moisture percentages and protein data. Trucks transmit weight and quality metrics to port terminals before unloading. In Saskatchewan, a wheat order from Japan can be processed and confirmed in under 4 hours with guaranteed delivery dates. In the US Midwest, it often takes 3 days just to confirm what's in stock. At the ports, the Canadian Grain Commission certifies each shipment, listing the exact wheat variety, protein percentage, and quality grade. The US system relies on private inspectors who don't answer to any central authority. Last year, 3 different US inspectors graded the same Kansas wheat load as number 1 hard red, number 2 amber durum, and feed grade, all within 48 hours. Canadian Grain doesn't have that problem. Each rail car heading to Vancouver gets tracked by satellite with automated moisture sensors. If readings spike during transport, buyers get notified before offloading. Europe pays a 12% premium for Canadian wheat because of the digital trail. France's Ministry of Agriculture approved Canada's carbon tracking system last year, embedding emissions data into those QR codes. US exporters still submit handwritten fuel logs that EU customs agents routinely reject. That's why Canadian wheat sales to the EU jumped 40% while American shipments stalled. Canada built a system where nothing is left to chance, from the combine to the cargo ship. But while Canadian farms are expanding and adapting, the situation for US wheat growers looks very different. Across the Midwest, US wheat farmers are facing a crisis. The USDA expects hard red spring wheat acreage to fall to just 9.4 million acres in 2025, the lowest level since 1970. That's not just a number, it's a signal that growers are pulling back because they can't make the math work. International buyers have moved on, and the market for American wheat has dried up. The result? Storage silos in Kansas are filling up fast, with stocks up 44% over last year. The spot market has slipped, with wheat prices dropping from $6.92 to $6.05 per bushel. At these prices, many farmers can't cover their costs, and every extra bushel just deepens the losses. High storage costs are eating into already thin margins. Some elevators in Kansas have stopped taking new deliveries, and backup storage is expensive. Farmers are watching their profits evaporate as they pay to store unsold wheat with no buyers in sight. The impact isn't contained to the farm. Local equipment dealers say orders for new machinery have slowed to a crawl, and lenders are tightening credit. Applications for farm equipment loans are being delayed or denied. Many farmers are carrying too much debt from previous tough years. And with wheat prices in the gutter, banks are hesitant to take on more risk. The loss of export markets is hitting hard. Mexico, once the top buyer for Kansas wheat, has cut its orders nearly in half. Korean mills have walked away after pesticide residue concerns. Japan shifted the vast majority of its purchases to Canada. Industry research shows that once a miller switches suppliers, there's only a 15% chance they'll return within 5 years. That's a long-term blow. Major U.S. flour producers are closing facilities, and rural economies are feeling the ripple effects. The economic impact goes beyond the farm gate. Local businesses that depend on agriculture are seeing less foot traffic, and some are shutting down altogether. Rail shipments out of the Midwest are down, while Canada has expanded its export capacity to meet new demand. Minnesota farmers planted 18% less wheat this spring, while just across the border, Manitoba boosted wheat acreage by 22%. The shift is clear, and the consequences are piling up. The domestic market can't absorb the surplus. U.S. mills only use about 28% of the total wheat crop, and feedlots buy another 12%, but at steep discounts. The rest either sits in storage or gets sold below cost to overseas buyers. many of whom now prefer Canadian wheat for its guaranteed quality and documentation. This isn't a temporary setback. The US relied on reputation, while global buyers demanded proof. Now the market has changed. Reliability and transparency matter more than ever, and American wheat is being left behind. The question is, what happens next as the rules of global wheat trade get rewritten? This is what's changed. Buyers now put reliability and predictability above everything else. It's not about the lowest price anymore. Countries want wheat that arrives on time, meets every documented requirement, and never gets stuck in customs. If a shipment gets rejected or delayed, that costs more than paying a premium for certainty. So they're picking suppliers who can guarantee exactly what's on the invoice. No surprises, no last-minute paperwork problems. Canada's rail network and government support give it an edge over US bottlenecks. Trains run on schedule and the grain keeps moving. In the US, port slowdowns and labor disputes have become common, and buyers see the difference. When you're running a mill in France or a bakery in Mexico City, you can't afford to wait days for a shipment to clear. Canada added compliance centers, like the one in Manitoba for Mexican buyers, to provide pre-approved documentation, integrated customs tagging, and guaranteed delivery timelines. That's why Canadian wheat exports to Mexico jumped 37% in just 6 months, while US shipments stalled. Political risk now outweighs price differences. The constant threat of new tariffs, revoked export licenses, and shifting trade policies has turned US wheat into a risky bet. Buyers remember when shipments got held up because of a trade dispute or a sudden rule change. Canada, by contrast, offers stable policies that let importers plan ahead. That's not just a talking point. France, for example, cut US imports to their lowest level since 2002 after repeated documentation failures and switched a big share of its business to Canada. Food security is driving every decision. Countries are treating wheat as a strategic asset, not just a commodity. Japan pays more for Canadian wheat because the QR codes on every shipment prove the grain's quality, protein content, and pesticide levels before the ship leaves port. Europe now mandates carbon emissions data on every load, and Canada's system integrates those scores directly into their digital paperwork. US exporters, meanwhile, still rely on handwritten fuel logs and paper certificates that customs agents routinely reject. That's how Canada took a lead in the EU market and why buyers across Asia and Latin America are making the switch. The global wheat market isn't just getting more competitive, it's becoming more fragmented and politically sensitive. Buyers are diversifying their sources and the old rules don't apply. Canada invested nearly $1 billion in tracking tech and compliance centers to meet these new demands. The US stuck with privatized inspections and patchwork oversight, and political fights over trade eroded trust. Now, buyers are picking suppliers who treat wheat as a national security issue and back up every shipment with enforceable guarantees. That's the new reality. Cheap prices and paper certificates aren't enough. The risk of a rejected or delayed shipment is too high. Reliable, transparent systems are the new standard, and countries are rewarding those who can deliver. The US needs to act if it wants to regain its place in the global wheat market. That means modernizing quality tracking, centralizing inspections, and giving buyers the proof they demand. Private grading systems haven't kept up. Canada's centralized tracking and QR code system show what's possible when a country invests in transparency and infrastructure. If the US doesn't move quickly, it will keep losing ground. Policy changes, digital certification, and rail upgrades are necessary steps. This isn't just about wheat, it's about control over global food supply chains. Subscribe for future deep dives on trade policy and agricultural markets. Should the US copy Canada's system? Let me know in the comments.